Well, hi guys, it's Ian at SS 8000 Cars saying hello, and today's been quite a day. Had a ride in the M600 Noble. Oh my goodness me, that car is fantastic. It's compared to this, it's just completely different. It's quite an analog driving experience, the Noble, to be truthful. So, you know, whereas I'd say McLaren are definitely in the digital world, the Noble isn't, but it has an attraction because it's quite visceral. I mean, the power that you have and the torque that's available when you're actually racing down the roads is incredible. I mean, you don't have to change gear. It's a manual, but you don't have to change gear. First and second, obviously, you'd use to get yourself going, but you know, third and fourth do the majority of the work. And the power step, as I think I said earlier, and certainly will be in the video, we have a dial which you can literally dial in the power. And because of that, it makes it incredibly exciting to turn the dial up to 650 brake horsepower. Oh my goodness. And the Yamaha engine, you know, in the past, one of the things that would have worried people, of course, is British manufacturers and their liability. Sorry, and their reliability, not their liability, excuse me, but British manufacturers and their reliability. But the Yamaha engine, you know, you can genuinely use. That car that I drove today done 30,000 miles, so it's a well-used example. Yes, so back to what I was saying. Basically, the body shells and chassis are not made in South Africa now. I think I said earlier that they were put together in Port Elizabeth, but apparently they're made exclusively by a dedicated company here in the UK. But then they're all taken to the Noble Automotive headquarters, which is in Leicester, and they're assembled by 10 people, which is where all the engines come to and all the chassis components come to. And as a consequence of that, the same 10 people build each car, and they're focusing on producing one a month. Now, I mean, that is incredibly low volumes. Difficult to believe that they'd be that profitable. But then on the other hand, you know, with a few extras, Lee was saying that the car is £260,000. So I guess given the way that the car is constructed, I guess there's a fair amount of profit in that. But a very nice car to drive. And, you know, I think, you know, you sort of get more of a racing feeling in the long tail, which we're in now. You know, you sort of feel with the bucket seats and the carbon fibre monocell, and, you know, just the way the car is designed, especially with mine having the titanium cage. I just think, you know, you feel like you're in a racing car in this. You don't feel that to the same extent in the Noble, but in some ways that's a benefit to it, because, you know, in this car you're sort of always aware of the size, especially the rear arches are quite protruded on the long tail, and, you know, once you're in it you're fine, and once you're on the road you're fine, but even threading it through country lanes you're sort of aware of it. I'd say the Noble is genuinely like driving a Focus. Okay, you know, it's a low car, and to an extent you've got to let yourself fall into it, but once you're in it, it's very easy to drive, and it's got an immense amount of torque. And I think I said earlier, the Yamaha engine will be practically unbreakable, I suspect. You know, they are brilliant at producing fantastically engineered products, Yamaha. I mean, you'd put them up there with McLaren without a doubt. So I think in the M600 you've got a car that you can do 30,000 and not worry about it. And the other thing that Lee told me was you genuinely don't have to spend much money running that car. He reckons less than 1,000 a year, which, I mean, given that I've had a number of Ferraris, you'd be very lucky to get away with a couple of grand a year in a Ferrari, and that's really when the car is relatively young, and they're providing most of the cost contribution, because, as you probably know, Ferraris are covered for 4 years, and the maintenance, the actual maintenance cost, not the parts, are covered for 7 years. In the McLaren we have 2, and although I didn't ask you that question, I'll find that out for you later. Definitely they're covered for, I would imagine, for 2 years in the M600 as well. And you know, just following it here, it's a great looking car. I think from the front it's perhaps not quite as exciting as the 675. I mean, I think this car it's an absolute event. It's an event to look at, and it's an event to drive. I think the Noble from the front looks a little more ordinary, but then that's partly down to the fact that the spoiler and splitters are much higher. A bit like with the Speciale, really. You didn't really need the lifting system in the Speciale, but you absolutely do need it in the McLaren. Now, this car, you couldn't drive it in quite a lot of places, and including over some of the humps in central London, if you didn't have the lifter. The Noble has steel brakes, but they're racing specification steel brakes, so I imagine they're immensely good at stopping you. It's definitely a car to be used every day. I'm not even sure I'd bother putting it in the garage. Love to have the carbon effect version. Apparently the Spider version of the M600 is they calling the Speedster, and the Speedster, apparently the one that they've got as their demo, the Speedster is in a very, very dark green, but it's the carbon weave is visible on all the panels of the car. Now, he was saying he wasn't sure of the blue being the best colour, but actually I think the blue, certainly from this position, I think the blue is really quite striking, especially if you actually had that with the carbon weave exposed. Yes, I think this is maybe slightly the more comfortable environment, but I've got in my head at the moment a thought process about you know, having a number of British cars in the stable and really being British car orientated. Now, I certainly will have the new Porsche GT3 manual even when that car gets launched, although my spies tell me that it's imminent, so hopefully if I can get hold of one of those, I'll definitely have that. Or I'd like to have one GT Porsche in the fold. But I'm really interested in the M600. I mean, I really like it. It's almost like a back to basics car. They've really made it as simple. It's race car focus, although actually it doesn't have adjustable suspension. And I'd say the suspension in the M600 has been set up really for the road rather than it's a softer suspension than I think than you have in the GT4, to be truthful. Nice to drive on the road, and certainly enough to tie it down without a shadow of a doubt. But you know, I think it would not be too complicated to offer adjustable suspension in that car. By adjustable, I'm sure you could adjust that suspension, but I think it would probably need to go back to the factory. Whereas I'm talking about having adjustable settings on the suspension, so you go on a track day, you can actually take it out on the track and you can adjust the suspension, go out and see how that affects the the way that the car handles. That's what I'm really talking about. The other thing is that the M600, I think maybe because it doesn't have a carbon monocell, it's a by and large it's a steel chassis, steel shell. The reality is that you don't quite get the vibrations that you get when you're in the McLaren. I've noticed that with carbon fiber monocells, you seem to get slightly more vibration coming through the structure than you do in the Noble. But on the other hand, I think perhaps that makes it a little easier for driving in cities and the like. Obviously, maybe it's not quite as rigid. It seemed very rigid. I mean, I'm not an expert, but it seemed very rigid to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed the driving. Went out for half an hour, and then we're going to do a much longer drive early next year, so we get a much better feel for the car itself and what it's like to actually live with, because you can't do that in the period of time that I had available to me. That Noble is seriously fast, although I would have to say I didn't really have a huge problem in keeping up with him once I floored it, but he probably wasn't in manning mode himself. I think we were trying to show you the potential the cars have without taking any risks and going too mad. I think it's just what you have to do. There's not much else on the road that we keep up with. Wow. The only slight problem is it slightly sets the bar for what you expect a supercar to be able to do, and these cars, they are just so fast. Well, it's Ian from SS 8000 Cars, one of the best mornings I've ever had. Signing off, please make sure you subscribe, and there's going to be lots more of that. Thanks guys.